Hello everyone, and thank you very much for joining me today. We start a new playlist and we discuss one of the books I wrote, and I would say it's the book that is the most appreciated out of the 5 books that I've written in the previous few years. I have a paper copy with me here, so it's The Spring Start Here. You probably know it. Thank you very much for being here with me. We are here today because I want you to be able to ask the questions. I'm pretty sure that there are many of you who maybe are not able to buy the book itself, but I want to still share the details of the book with you. And of course, you already know that I have a playlist here on this channel that you can use as well with plenty of information, and you can leave your comments in the comment section. By the way, if you are here with me live, you have the live chat here. There, I always keep an eye on the live chat and I say hi as well. And yeah, in case you don't attend the event live, you still have the chance to ask your questions in the comment section. Let me share my screen and talk about the book. This is the main page from Manning.com, who is the main publisher of the book, and you can see that the book has been published first of all in English, and it has a couple, actually 3 translations, so you find it in Korean, Russian and simplified Chinese as well. So in case the English version is not for you, you might want to read one of the translations, like for example the Korean version, which is this one. It looks a little bit different, but it should say the same excellent stuff that you need to know as a Spring developer. So this is a book for beginners. It takes you from scratch with frameworks, and it teaches you the very basics of Spring that you should know. So unlike other books that are very deeply going into specific more advanced framework stuff, Spring Start Here, as the name suggests, is the place where you as a beginner should start to get the very essential foundations that you need before going into complexities. Because trust me, friends, I've seen so many developers going straight into complex functionalities, implementing complex capabilities with Spring, but not knowing the very essentials behind the scenes. And then of course the risk is that you don't implement them correctly, or you may working is not necessarily correctly, okay? So you implement something that's working but is not 100% correct. You implement something that works but it's not 100% maintainable, or it might even be problematic in the future with the maintainability itself of the application, with the security, with vulnerabilities, with performance, with many things might happen if you improperly use a tool. So frameworks, like anything else, they are tools that we use for implementing apps. No, they are tools that we need to know how to use. If you use a hammer and you don't know how to use a hammer, you might use it wrongly. Any kind of tool, but the more complex the tool is, the more difficult it is to use it. No, and frameworks tend to become complex. Spring is complex. It's a vast ecosystem. Hibernate is complex. No. Name them. Usually frameworks in development, they are complex. So let's try to start from the beginning and learn properly the framework. And in this playlist I'm gonna go chapter by chapter into discussing this book, which you of course have the opportunity to read it in the paper form. As you have seen already, I have my English but also my Korean translation here as paper copies, but you can also find it in the electronic version, and you find it on the Manning platform. So this was the main page. You can see, you can find the ebook, the printed, even you even have an audio version of it. I'm not sure how it sounds. I don't know if I would recommend it or not. Probably yes, but I'm into reading, so I'm gonna focus now on reading itself throughout this playlist. So you find it here, and you find it in different electronic shapes. So you can go through it, see electronically from the first page to the last page. I'm gonna skip over the forward, the acknowledgements, and so on and so forth. You read them later if you want. And similarly, you find it, for example, on the O'Reilly Learning platform, which is a very popular platform that not only has books from Manning, but also from other publishers like A-Press, like O'Reilly themselves, like Pact, and others, Edison Wesley, I don't know. And it also has different video materials. Now, I know O'Reilly Learning is not cheap, but if you afford it, or if your company affords it for you, it makes a lot of sense. I tell you, I'm reading a lot more since I'm reading a lot more since I have a subscription on O'Reilly Learning than I would have been able to read previously, because, well, previously to O'Reilly Learning I was paying like maybe let's say $40 per book. So if I wanted 10 books, I'm going to afford $400 already, which is, I think, the annually subscription for O'Reilly, or somewhere around that. And with this, with a subscription, you have all the books now, so you are not afraid of, hey, what happens if I buy this book but I discover that it's not for me? So I read a couple of chapters and it's not the subject that I wanted to read. No, you don't like buy the book and then you lose the money because you didn't buy something that is for you. So that's why I like O'Reilly. But of course, I know it might be expensive, so I'm just giving you alternatives. I don't say they are perfect. But I'm here into discussing the books. I'm gonna go through the book directly now. I'm gonna skip everything. I'm gonna go to the first chapter, and we are gonna discuss this. This is a very light chapter, fortunately. For the very beginning, we are gonna discuss this chapter 1, which is light. So today's lesson or discussion, or call it however you want, will not be that long, and eventually will not be that complex, because we are only going to discuss Spring as a framework in the real world. And I will do that basing my thoughts and the everything I will say on the book itself. Okay, so if you are here with me, please do ask the questions. Again, I'm gonna keep an eye on the live chat. Will your Java book be also in English? I'm not sure. I think you mean my 5th book, which is in Romanian. I'm not sure if I will or not translate it. All the other 4, you find them in English and other languages as well. So going back to our book, in chapter 1, you can skim through it very quickly, and that's what we're gonna do today, because it is very low, starts again from the very scratch by discussing the advantages and disadvantages of frameworks in general, what a framework is, why do frameworks exist, and Spring in general, what is Spring as a framework, why do we love Spring as a framework, why do we want it, why do we need it, and so on and so forth. So let's go a little bit through. If you if you start learning with the first paragraphs, you will see that I gave you some insights at the time of writing the book, which was year 2020, because the book was published, I think, in 2021. So I was writing it during like end of 2020 up to end of 2021. It takes usually about a year to write a book like this. So you see there are a couple of surveys, survey reports where you find that Spring is now recognized as being I would say not one of the most powerful Java frameworks for software development, but I would actually say the most powerful. And I know, yes, I don't want to deal with absolutes, but we have to be honest, Spring is used almost everywhere nowadays. So there are other excellent frameworks, and I don't want to be disrespectful to those, because all the teams that work with those frameworks, they do also an excellent job, and some of the frameworks have their own benefits. But Spring became, throughout the past 25 years or so, one of the most powerful framework, an entire universe of capabilities that you can use almost out of the box with your Java applications. So that's why I say here Spring is popular, and developers have started to use it more often with other JVM languages as well. So I'm referring here to Kotlin. You will find nowadays many applications that don't necessarily use Spring with Java, but Kotlin became a very popular language as well. Kotlin is also a language over the JVM, so it's still part of the Java family of technologies. Is newer, it has a lot of nice stuff there that makes your code shorter, and many developers love using it because it makes the code a lot more readable. Point is, I'm talking now about Spring. I'm discussing it with Java examples usually because Java is kind of well known, so it's rather likely that any Kotlin developer will know Java, but not necessarily any Java developer knows Kotlin. That's why I'm gonna talk about I'm gonna talk about it with Java examples, but you have to know that everything that we discuss can be applied with Kotlin as well. Can we create an Android application using Spring? I don't think that Spring is meant for Android applications. Now, first of all, remember that Android is special in terms of the platform itself, and it started with Java, which was derived from version 6 of Java, and then that was replaced with Kotlin mainly nowadays. So it's when you create an Android project, you create usually a Gradle project with Kotlin as a language at its base. Spring, however, had at some point a project that was designed for that, and we might be able to actually find it here, but I don't think that is so popular as many of the other projects. And by the way, I will explain you what that is. I think it was actually put in the attic, so that means Spring for Android. See it here. So to answer your question, kind of there was an initiative and it was used at some point, but at the moment it's not the one of the main approaches that you would use. I would, however, suggest to get more details from a mobile developer about that, because even if I had some history related to mobile development in my past with Android, it was at in some times where Java was still used and we were in, say, different kind of times. Now Spring is not something that you would use for Android anymore, but I think somewhere in my book I mentioned that there is kind of this project that at some point you would have used. So it's not it's still likely that if you have an older project, you go to a company, you have some older project to maintain, you might even find this still used, if it wasn't refactored with something else. Very good question, thank you very much. So let's go further. So you already understood this paragraphs here all tell you that Spring is popular and give you different kind of details about Spring itself and how will we approach this throughout the book. But let's take a step back and let's discuss first of all about frameworks in general. So I'm an old guy. You can see that I have a beard, I have a hat on my head. It means I'm old. I'm old enough to have worked on applications where no frameworks have been used. So that kind of Java application where everything was vanilla Java, and because there was no real framework at the time, you had to create always your own capabilities, which means that if you implemented transactionability, security, logging and observability, name any kind of these technicalities, you had to write them yourself. So there was, of course, a lot of juicy stuff with the JDK, but the JDK doesn't offer you like everything, every capability like a Lego piece out of the box. You still have to build it. So it's very difficult when you have to do that yourself, and not only that is difficult, but you end up with many implementations. Now I go from one project to the other, you have to learn a different approach, different style of implementing the stuff, because any approach was only supported in one application. That means that there could be more bugs overall, because there wasn't like something that was used throughout the globe by billions, millions of developers. It's only used in that specific application. So vulnerabilities, bugs in general, stuff like that, they are always more frequent when you have to build that yourself. Frameworks became a stuff because they were needed, they were requested by the developers. Developers said, hey, why should I build transactionability in this application when transactionability is a mechanism that should work almost the same in all applications? Can we do it another way around? Can we have a module that gives that capability, gives you that capability out of the box, and I only slightly alter it, change it according to my needs in that specific application? Why should I write 100% of that capability over and over again when I can reuse 99% of it or 95% of it, and only that 5 to 0% of slight changes being needed? So frameworks, what do they allow you? They do provide you capabilities like pieces of Lego, and then you can assemble it as you need. You have the capability, you just assemble it to build different applications. So you build different applications, but with a lot less effort. And not only it's about the effort itself, because yes, you use something that already exists without building it yourself, but as we discussed a little bit earlier, it's also now that capability being the same that's used throughout applications around the globe, now is not only one application using it, but it's thousands or tens of thousands of applications or hundreds of thousands of applications using it. So if there is a vulnerability or a bug, it's more likely that will be discovered, and many applications will be spared of having to work on maintaining that. So they are more robust this way. It's like something that is tested by so many people, no? Yeah, and I like my analogy here is imagine a build yourself stuff, no? Like for example, the Swedish, I think it is shop, IKEA, no, it's where you go and buy something like a wardrobe, and you get the pieces and you have to assemble them. But the point is that here it's a lot larger, no? It's you have to you just get everything, and you can assemble it the way you want. So it doesn't give you some pieces from the very beginning and you always create the same wardrobe. No, it gives you some pieces, but you always can create something else from the same pieces. So it's your choice. So that's everything about that. So some of the things that you can do, so logging, transactions, we said already, security, communication, things like caching, compression, many capabilities that are technical. They don't have to be much different from one application. Sometimes they are not different at all, because in the end, the heart of an application is the business logic that you implement. And that's another advice from my side, friends, is always as a developer, learn the business logic. try to understand the business of the application, because what makes a big difference between an average developer and a very good developer is that the very good developers not only understand the technicalities, they not only know how to use Spring and Java and Hibernate and stuff, but they also understand very well the business, so they can act as consultants. They understand how to improve, how to augment the business by using those technicalities. They don't have the perspective of only receiving a task and solving it, but they receive a task, they analyze it through the eyes of the lens of business, and they can improve the business and suggest changes and then implement them properly using the technologies. So keep that in mind. One very strong advice: learn the business of the application that you implement. That's very important, okay? And that's basically also what makes a big difference between why do we have frameworks in general, because the reality is that this big part of the iceberg down below, caching, data transfer, logging, security, transactionability, and so on and so forth, name them yourself, you find them, they are very big, but what makes a difference is the business logic, because that's different from one organization to the other, from one application to the other. It's not only that it's different between two different kinds of businesses, like of course it's different in food delivery application rather than, I don't know, something hotels management application, but it's also different between two same business stream applications, because that's what organizations do. Organizations, they grow strategies. What makes one organization more successful than other is a different strategy that fits well to the present and the future. So when you have two competitive businesses on the same business branch, like for example you have Lyft and Uber, I don't know, they are two known driving applications, I think, in the whole world. What might make one more successful than the other is how they implement their strategies. And to implement their strategies, they have to change their applications that they use, and they change the application in a specific way, so the business logic differs. But the framework might offer the same thing, allowing developers to focus here where it is important. So that's why the framework, you learn it once to allow you focus on the important stuff, and the important stuff is the business logic. So I see some questions or mentions here. Let me go through them. Okay, a question: you can help strong knowledge ++ JavaScript React. Oh, you have more knowledge than I have, Venom. So you want to learn Java? Ping me on LinkedIn or somewhere on social media after, and we can discuss. Okay, to avoid spending the time now, because the topic is unrelated to what we discuss here, and we want to focus on the important Spring stuff that we want to discuss. Good. So I think that makes you a big picture of the importance of frameworks in general. No, so go through that, but the point is exactly this one. Okay, I have some stories here. So now sometimes you will find good some of the best things that I did in my experience, but you will also sometimes in my books find stories about stuff that was mistakes that I've done. Now this is a story of a change that I'm proud of. I've been working with some awesome people at that time, many years ago, into changing some application. And this application was a very old application containing many modules, many kind of technologies. Some of it was written in Java Standard Edition, some of it was a web implementation using Java EE. Java EE doesn't exist anymore now. From starting with 2019, it has been renamed to Jakarta EE once the project has been transitioned from Oracle to Eclipse Foundation, I think, if I'm not wrong. And the point is, so this didn't use a framework throughout, I think, a few millions of lines of code. And the point is that what we did was tried progressively to replace custom implementations such as custom transactionability, custom observability, and so on and so forth with Spring, with a framework. And at that time, being that Spring was already one of the most appreciated frameworks, of course we have chosen Spring. So the result was that we removed about, at the end, 40% of the lines of code. Imagine what 40% out of some millions of lines of code represent. It's huge. I mean, it doesn't only improve a lot the footprint of the application, but it improves the maintainability, it improves the security, because less lines of code, it means less chances to have vulnerabilities. It improves the CI/CD pipeline itself. It improves everything. One of the goals, remember, this is stuff that I know you learn usually with clean coding. One of the things is that when you write a capability, always try to implement it correctly, but with the smallest amount of lines of code. It's always better to write less to solve the same rather than write more to solve the same. So try to write less. Frameworks and good frameworks allow you to write less. Okay, so let's go further and discuss a little bit of the Spring ecosystem. And I'm going to go through these points here, and then I'm going to show you the Spring projects, because I have already been here. And one of the websites I would like you to know as a Spring developer, it's spring.io. So this is where you should go always when you have any question that could be answered in the documentation or description. Everything that's ready to a Spring project, the point of start is this one. So this is where you have access to the community. This is where you can find the calendar here. Calendar is calendar Spring.io or something like that. Okay, where you find all the next releases. So keep this Spring.io in mind, because it's for a Spring developer, it's basically the manual. No, it's you have to have kind of a manual. Is this website spring.io. So when I'm talking about the basics and the foundation of Spring, I cannot talk about all that Spring is in a book. No, this book has how many pages? Let me see. So about 370 pages. Okay, somewhere there, 380 pages. A book cannot be very large. Even if you make it twice, you cannot cover everything about Spring. Spring is a huge universe. Go here to projects and find out about all the projects. These that you see here, they are active projects, all of this. And all of them might have its own notebook, a shelf of books in a library. So I have to think about what I'm gonna tell someone that needs to know the root of everything to be able to grow like a plant and discover then on every branch of the plant or tree or whatever grows the projects throughout the years, because it takes years to learn. And even after years, I cannot say that I have experience with absolutely all the projects that you see here. Some of them I might have seen more times, multiple times. Some of them I might have seen only once. And there are some of them that I didn't even use, for example, in a real world application. Because even as a consultant and even by seeing many projects, many teams and so on, still you don't necessarily have the chance to touch everything, no? So you, as a beginner with Spring that has just bought the Spring Start here, you want to learn about the Spring Core. Here you will learn about things like the context, which is the most essential of the things with any framework, and with Spring in this case, which we will talk about in the next chapters. We will learn about instrumentation and AOP, aspect-oriented programming, what aspects are. You will see that aspects are a way in which the Spring might manipulate executions. And of course, different very basic things, such as, for example, the Spring expression language that you use throughout different applications. And then once you've learned this, if you only know this, they are very useful. You will see when we handle them even with code in the next chapters. But I want people to also understand, then to say, after this book I was able to write applications. So if you are a developer today, one of the kinds of applications that you might need to implement more frequently is web applications. Web applications mean not only applications with web pages, but also applications with REST endpoints. And for that, you need to learn about the model view controller. This is mandatory, it's part of the basics. There should be no Spring developer that doesn't understand the design of Spring MVC. Because today, there's probably no Spring developer who hasn't implemented at least a REST endpoint in a standard non-reactive application. Then of course, there is almost no application that doesn't store data for processing. So that's why I said this is still part of the basics. If you are a beginner, there should be no developer that doesn't know at least the basics of connecting to at least SQL databases. Although you will see that Spring offers a big variety of capabilities to connect to any kind of data storage, including NoSQL. And of course, last but not the least, it is essential for every developer to understand testing. Unit and integration testing are a must and should not be missed throughout any application. Okay, some more questions, so let me clarify them first before moving forward. What's the difference between Spring Project and Spring Module? Usually I use them interchangeably. So I do prefer to name them project, because if you take like Spring Boot is not a module, it's a project, but you have a team working, a separate team working on it, and it gives you some capabilities. Spring Security, again, it's a Spring project, but you can consider it as being a framework of itself for ensuring security. So kind of many use them interchangeably, but that's because, you know, the name module, where does it actually come from? Why sometimes you refer to them as modules is because Spring itself, it's been created in such a way in which when you add the dependencies, you don't have to add all the Spring in your application. It would make no sense. Spring is huge. It's an entire universe of capabilities. So every capability has its own dependency. So it's like a modular implementation. It's a modular design And that's basically why sometimes we refer to them as modules, because you say, hey, I've added from Spring that specific part that I needed, or those specific parts, and there might be many. And this is actually an excellent design, because it allows you to only add to your application what you use. You don't have to have there things that you don't use as much as possible, of course. So that's why we sometimes refer them to projects. Other times we refer to them as modules to actually refer to the modularity itself. I hope that makes it clear. Is Hibernate a prerequisite to learning Spring Boot? I would say no. I mean, Spring Boot is Spring Boot, Spring is Spring. It's not for Spring either a prerequisite. You can learn it after, you can learn it before. Hibernate is an ORM, a JPA implementation, a framework for persistence, but you can write Spring Boot applications that don't connect to a database. No, not every Spring Boot application connects to a database. Not every Spring application in general connects to a database. No, remember that here we discuss Spring in general and not only Spring Boot. And very important for any Spring developer is that to understand that they first need to clearly understand some parts of the Spring vanilla itself before jumping into Spring Boot, because a big mistake that's made by many today is that they go to Spring Boot directly and they understand some things at the surface. They don't understand what's down below, and then that can cause issues. Videos on microservices, yeah, maybe in a different stream. WebSockets, I think I do have something with WebSockets. Maybe you can check the reactive Spring playlist on this channel, but I will check them as well, because I think it's been some time since I created those. What do you mean by standard non-reactive application? Very good question, actually. We will go throughout all this, of course. I will not be able to explain everything at once, but when we discuss web applications, we have the imperative approach, which is the standard approach that's done with Spring MVC, but there is also Spring Reactive. Spring Reactive is a different project that allows you to implement web application with a reactive design behind the scenes. Now, what a reactive design is, it's a little bit more difficult to explain in a few minutes, so I would actually redirect you to my Spring Reactive playlist, and that's an entire playlist, and you will be able to understand better what Spring Reactive is and what a reactive design is in general. Hey, look, I do really like this this diagram here. So it tells you something that I find very important. A Spring core is somewhere at the middle. It gives you the context and the aspects, and this is basically what we discuss in the first part of this book. And then everything else is like a solar system here. Let's say a representation of a solar system, of how other projects, they are supported, they are kept by the gravitational field of the context and aspects. So you can imagine, no, close your eyes and imagine the big part of context and AOP keeping together all the other Spring projects, like the sun keeps together the planets in a solar system. Quickly explain MVC. Not now. Let's do it like that, because if I would try to explain quickly everything that's in the first chapter here, there will be no other videos later. There will be a chapter on this. So if I'm going here just to show you, because it's the first one, no, we will discuss in chapter 8 about web apps and Spring MVC. So let's get to there and take them one by one, okay? So that we can cover them properly. Can I pass Spring Certified Professional exam with this book? No, I doubt that this is enough. So I would actually recommend you a dozen of books actually to read before. This is not only not enough in terms of information, so you need more information, which you will find in multiple books. I would recommend you here especially search all the books that Juliana Kosmina has written, just search her by name on Google and you will find the books. They are not only more complete in terms of the certification, but they also, you know, when you go to a certification, you have to understand the questions in the certification. That's how it works. So it's not enough even if you take a professional Spring developer, very experienced, if they don't know how to think in the certification way of thinking, they might fail the exam. So certification is a totally different thing that you have to treat it differently, and there are books specifically written for that. So I'm gonna write this Juliana Cosmina in the chat, so you can search for her books, which are specifically designed for certification for Spring. Okay, so if you want certification, go for that. Avoid hibernate, use fly when you write your own SQL queries. I don't agree with that. Please be very careful with this kind of advice because it might be misinterpreted. When you write hibernate, you might use JPQL queries or you can use native queries. Flyway, on the other hand, it's only used for DDL queries. So it's those queries like create, alter, drop, which you use when you design the structure of the database. That's what you need to avoid with Hibernate. So be careful. When you say don't avoid SQL queries, no, you avoid DDL queries, not SQL queries. You do use SQL queries without any problem with Hibernate. When you have to write DDL queries, on the other hand, do use Flyway or Liquibase because it's a way to version those scripts so that the entire structure of the database is versioned. But again, not a topic for today, okay? Lecture on Jakarta data, maybe, I'm not sure. Okay, happy to hear that the book was helpful. Why is Spring still fast even though probably it uses Java reflection behind the scenes? I mean, what's wrong with it? Java is not that slow in the end as we are supposed to be, and Spring is as much fast as Java allows it to be. So Spring doesn't make things faster in general. It's supported. It's a Spring application. It's always supported by the JVM. So that means that is as much as Java is fast, as much Spring will also be fast. Okay, cool. So let's go. We've seen this representation and I hope you liked it. So and this is basically okay, fine enough. So we go into the Spring core, and I have already explained you that there are two things that you will learn in the book. One of them, first one, is about inversion of control. Is the inversion of control implementation called dependency injection, and the other one is the aspects. So inversion of control is a concept where something else manages your code through reflection, because you were actually discussing about reflection in the live chat, no? So through reflection, Spring controls your code. So that's why since the application usually controls, like for example, controls objects directly, and through objects does different stuff, which is changing data or interpreting data. But with IOC, you have something that controls the code that you write, the application. So it's no longer the application controlling something, is something controlling your application. That's why it's called inversion of control. The control has inverted from the application that was responsible for managing stuff in order to process the data to something else that manages your application in order to process the data. And there are two things, two implementations for this concept. One is dependency injection and the other one is aspects. And both of these very essential concepts, we will discuss them in the next chapters. So why is this needed actually? Because I think all the next paragraphs just debate on why this is needed, because this is the way in which Spring, our framework that we will use, attaches capabilities to your application. This is the way in which the framework can say, when the application executes this way, do use transactionability, or use logging, or use this security stuff when the application does something. So it's the way in which the framework controls the application execution so that it can augment it with different capabilities. You imagine that? No? So you see the application running, you are the framework. Imagine you are the framework and the application is running. And what you do is you say, hey, when you execute that, please do it in a transaction. So it wraps the capability in a transaction. Okay. And different stuff, no? And then I will go later about Spring Boot. Now, different real world scenarios, because and that's, I think, the last thing that I want to discuss. I think it's also for the first chapter kind of the last thing, because then we discuss about the book, and we will go later with chapter 2. And Spring in real world scenarios, what I want you to remember is that Spring is a framework that can be used in any kind of an application. Because today, developers, young developers, usually understand Spring as being Spring Boot service, Spring Boot microservice running somewhere in cloud that connects to a database and exposes some endpoint. This is the wrong image, wrong picture created about Spring. Spring is Spring Boot. First of all, Spring is not Spring Boot, and Spring Boot is not Spring. And even if you would take them as equivalent, Spring applications are not necessarily just some services running in a cloud exposing a REST endpoint and connecting to a database. Spring is a framework that you can use in any kind of application depending on what kind of capability you want. For example, you might want to simply use the context. You might want to simply use the aspect capabilities. You might want to simply use, you can have that in a server-based application. You can have that in a client application. You might even have it in desktop applications without any problem. You can have that in applications designed to execute tests. Okay. And I just enumerated here, and so I've given some stories about that. And of course, there is also a point of, because when you start discussing and 3/4 of a chapter are about when to use frameworks are cool, you should use them, you should do that, you should do that. With that means that you always need to use frameworks, and in most cases you will end up using frameworks. Now, there are cases where frameworks are not necessarily the best choice, and it's a complex discussion, so I minimized it a lot here in the book, because the book is not about that in the end. The book is about Spring, and I don't want to spend many pages and get you bored discussing when not to use frameworks. But let's take an example. For example, you were discussing about Hibernate. Do you think that Hibernate is always the best choice for implementing the connection to a database? No. Hibernate might bring you a lot of complexity you don't need. If you have a simple applications and not that many relationships, or you simply work with many data in memory, you might actually benefit more about using JDBC directly rather than using Hibernate. Always when choosing a framework, it's as like choosing a tool. Do you really need that tool, or you do not need it at all? Because you might like try to cut a bread with chainsaw machine, or how it's called, but maybe you don't need that kind of chainsaw to cut a bread. You simply using a knife might be enough. And that's why don't use technologies just to use technologies That's what it's also called over engineering. And always when you use a tool, make sure that is the simplest. And I'm going back to what I've been saying also at the beginning of this stream, the simplest choice for your implementation. Remember that frameworks come also with things that you will not use. Because yes, we discussed Spring is modular, but even modular, a module still contain a lot of stuff, and you will not always have to use all of them. So that means that they will add things to your application that you might not need, which will increase the footprint. You have to ask yourself, by adding this framework, is it that I'm gonna add stuff like not needed? I'm actually maybe using too few out of these capabilities that it doesn't even make sense for me then to add and to grow the footprint of my application for that. Does it really make my life easier, or it simply just increases the footprint by adding dozens of capabilities I'm not using? No, that could be one of it. Then remember, security sometimes you need to write stuff that implements security capabilities that have to be custom. And sometimes in very sensitive projects, stakeholders don't accept using public frameworks, because public frameworks might come with vulnerabilities that are also known at some point. And even the most known public frameworks or libraries might have critical vulnerabilities. A vulnerability, you might find it where you don't even expect it. Remember a few years ago, Log4j. It's just a library for logging, and such a big deal it created that December, no? So adding a new dependency always comes with different risks. It comes with transitive other maybe jars and things that might themselves contain vulnerabilities. And now we do have scanners, and we do have DevSecOps, and we do have practices. But always remember my advice. If you don't need something, don't put it, because if it doesn't exist, it's more likely that it will save you a lot of work, no? It's like, imagine like that. If I want to choose between having a house with a few rooms, or a very large house, or a mansion, if the house is enough for me, then I would choose the house, because if I choose the mansion, then I have to spend things on cleaning constantly all the rooms that I might not even use, no? So if I don't really need the mansion, I would prefer to having something smaller, just because it either takes some time for me, or some money that I would spend for maintaining it. Same with code. You put something there, you will maintain it, even if it's not like your code, even if it's a library or framework. Then another thing is that, remember we started with discussing that's exactly the beginning of our why using frameworks is because sometimes is 90% is the same, and then you customize a little bit. But hell, if what you design there is really custom, then you don't add Spring and you customize everything out of it. So if you are in that case where it's 90% that transactionability mechanism, nothing special about it, maybe some tweak here and there, but that's it, then of course it makes sense. But if what you build is something really custom, really special for that specific case, then for that capability you don't use a framework. It doesn't make sense to add a framework just to change everything in how the framework works. No? And there are different cases in which, of course, you might simply not benefit from switching to a framework, which would simply mean you just over-engineer your application. We have already discussed about what we are learning in this book, and I'm glad that we came at the end of chapter 1 and we are just in time, and we just discussed, it was a theoretic go through, but in the next chapters where we discuss them, we're gonna discuss also with some practical examples, and I'm very ready for chapter 2, where we discuss about the beans and the very first stuff about the Spring context. Now we'll discuss the context and AOP, which is inversion of control in general. So with that being said, I'm gonna read, and I have one more question I see here, and then we're gonna close this, and I'm looking forward for more questions that we will address in the next discussion, which will also address at least the part, I hope, of chapter 2. So what is application in IOC? Without IOC, we just need to use new operator to create objects by yourself. So application IOC means classes that you write. No, when you write, and that's chapter 2 actually, and it will be probably even more clear next time when we discuss, but when you write whatever you write, classes that define, you'll see services, repositories, models, that's application. That's in the diagram that you have seen in chapter 1. That's what I refer to as application. And the framework Spring controls these classes, controls the classes that you write. So it's no longer simply the classes that you write controlling the entire flow. It's Spring controlling them to control the flow. That's inversion of control. And again, that I hope will become a lot more clear even in the next chapter. Okay, I see so many people have been here with me, and I'm very happy. 400 something views only during this event. That's great. This is the book. This is what we discuss. And it was only the first chapter. I will be very happy to see this, at least same many people here with me in the next discussion. And until then, I'm looking forward to your questions. Put them in the comment section, and I'm waving goodbye to everyone. Thank you very much for being here with me, and see you later as well.